Salvete, and welcome back to Weekly Roman History. Maybe it's been a week since you watched the last one, or maybe you're marathoning the whole playlist the morning of a JCL competition. Regardless, I'm glad to see you again. The content warning for this week is rape. There are two instances, neither described in any detail. I will use the title to show you when those parts of the story start and finish. Our main source for the stories in this video is the Ob Urbe Condita by the Roman historian Livy, who was writing under the reign of Augustus at the end of the 1st century BCE, at the same time as Virgil. This means that Livy is far from a primary source. He was writing 700 years after the events he's describing. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that events that happened in the ancient world all happened close together. When you look at this timeline, notice that it spans 16 centuries. The history of the United States spans only 2.5 centuries. 700 years ago for us was 1320 CE, which is before the Renaissance or even the Black Death. And the Romans of the era Livy is describing didn't write down their own histories at all. But a Roman historian wrote for very different purposes than a modern one does. Roman historians wrote to entertain, to impart moral lessons, and often to create or advance propaganda for the rulers of their day. Their interest was in telling a story, and strict historical accuracy was not necessary. They were happy to employ legends, rumors, and outright fabrications if they suited the story, so it's important to contextualize anything you read from a Roman historical source. Livy tends to be pretty dispassionate and interested in accuracy for a Roman historian. But of course there's no fact-checking a legend. That's right, this is the first of many reminders for this video. None of the history in this first handful of videos actually happened. We are in a portion of Roman history fully steeped in legend. Okay, I promised you we would found Rome this week, and by the gods, we're going to do it. But first we need to start in Alba Longa. Alba Longa, if you remember from last week, is the city founded by the son of Aeneas, whose name is Ascanius or Emulius. It's represented in the Aeneid by a white sow suckling 30 piglets. For the 30 years Ascanius will be on the throne there. Geographically, Alba Longa is a little northeast of Aeneas' city Lavinium, and a little southeast of the future site of Rome, but quite close to both. So, Alba Longa rolls along for a few generations, just having fun being a prosperous minor city in Latium. Then the legend goes that sometime in the 8th century BCE, a usurper takes the throne. The rightful king is good King Numitor, and his brother Amulius connives to get him exiled and takes power. He kills Numitor's son to make sure there's no one to challenge him for legitimacy. Numitor also has a daughter, Rhea Silvia. Amulius decides she's no threat, except for her potential to have a son, who would then be the grandson of Numitor and could challenge him. So he makes her a Vestal Virgin. Sidebar on the Vestal Virgins. The Vestal Virgins were a college of priestesses in Rome. During the most well-attested periods of Roman history, there were 6 Vestals at a time. Vesta, or in Greek Hestia, was the goddess of the hearth, the fireplace, which represented the very life of the house and the family who lived in it. Your fireplace gives you not only warmth, but also light and the ability to cook your food. Your fireplace represents your security, and worshipping Vesta similarly relates to the safety of Rome. The Vestal Virgins cared for Vesta's temple, and especially the eternal flame, a fire in the temple that was never supposed to go out. As long as the fire was burning, so the Romans believed, Rome could never fall. Roman Vestals were also said to be guarding over the Palladium, a statue of Minerva brought to Rome by Aeneas himself. And what was important to Amulius in our story here is that the Vestal Virgins remained virgins. They were pledged to the priesthood in late childhood or early adolescence, and took a vow of chastity for their full 30-year term as Vestal. The punishment for breaking the vow of chastity was being buried alive, though our sources say that that was really not enforced for most of Roman history. The presence of Vestal Virgins in 8th century BCE Alba Longa is very probably an anachronism. The Romans believed that Vesta was brought to Italy by Aeneas by way of Lavinium. In fact, Roman magistrates used to go to Lavinium to offer sacrifice to Vesta and to the Penates, the old household gods of Troy. In actual fact, the aboriginal gods of Italy were probably very different from the Greek-influenced gods we talk about as the Roman pantheon in later history. Certainly the Greek-influenced pantheon didn't come to Italy from Troy. The Trojans would have had a whole different religion. Were there really Vestal Virgins in Alba Longa in the 8th century BCE? It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. A certain porousness of time is to be expected in the legendary parts of Roman history. Traditions that belonged to the later Romans telling the story get moved back in time and attached to the historical people who would probably not have recognized them. Anyway, Amulius makes Rhea Silvia a Vestal Virgin, removing her from the risk of reproduction. What he didn't bargain for is the gods. Rhea Silvia goes to collect water from a spring sacred to Mars, the god of war, Ares in Greek. Mars is taken with her beauty, chases her into a cave, and rapes her. She becomes pregnant, and Vesta shows her displeasure in Rhea Silvia by causing her flame in Alba Longa to go out, which is some really crappy victim-blaming behavior, very reflective of ancient ideas about what rape means. It also speaks to the essence of Alba Longa falling to make way for its successor, Rome, which will soon be founded. Rhea Silvia gives birth to twin boys, Amulius's nightmare, 2 potential challengers. He knows they are the sons of the god Mars, so he has to proceed carefully. He locks up Rhea Silvia and gets a palace servant to kill the boys. He doesn't want their blood on his hands. The servant leaves them in a basket on the bank of the Tiber River to be washed away. Unfortunately for Amulius, the river picks up the babies and washes them downstream, depositing them on the bank at a bend in the river. There, a she-wolf who has lost her puppies finds them and suckles them. This image of the twin babies drinking the she-wolf's milk is one of the most recognizable in Roman history. The babies are then found by a shepherd, Faustulus, who raises them with his wife, Acca. They grow up to be Romulus and Remus, sons of a shepherd and known troublemakers. Shepherds lived out on the margins of civil society, outside the cities and the farmland, so they were in regular contact with the thieves that hid in the untamed wilderness and preyed on travelers. Romulus and Remus start to steal from these thieves, and they get accused of being thieves themselves. They are hauled to the nearest magistrate, which just so happens to be Numitor, deposed king of nearby Alba Longa and the grandfather of Romulus and Remus, though they don't know that. Faustulus does, though. Before Numitor can weigh whether or not these 2 teenagers were thieves, Faustulus reveals the whole bit about Mars and Rhea Silvia. He apparently had known about the incident when it occurred, and had put 2 and 2 together when he found twin babies around the same time. So Numitor gets Romulus and Remus's help to go depose Amulius, and he retakes his rightful place on the throne of Alba Longa. Romulus and Remus, with no connection to Alba Longa except their birth, decide to set out with a group of shepherds and found their own new city. They return to that same bend in the Tiber where they were deposited as babies, where the wolf found them, and they find 7 hills. It was common in the ancient world to build cities on hills because they're easier to defend, so this spot with 7 hills seems just perfect. But Romulus and Remus start to squabble. They have different ideas about which hill would be best to build on. They're both absolutely convinced that they're right. Brothers, am I right? Romulus wants the Palatine Hill, and Remus wants the Aventine Hill. So they decide they're going to settle this the logical way, through birdwatching. Sidebar on Augury. Augury is ancient Roman birdwatching. The gods were supposed to send signs through the flights of birds, just as they might send signs through the stars and planets, which humans interpret with astrology, or through the entrails of sacrificial animals, which humans interpret with haruspicy. Certain Roman priests were sanctified as augurs, and as long as they went through certain rituals beforehand, they could receive bird signs anywhere, anytime. The gods knew who to send the signs to and how. Because in Republican Rome, priesthood was tied up in politics, and a preponderance of politicians were augurs, this actually led to some mighty fishy business. An augur might block a vote from happening based on a sign from the gods that he and only he had seen. The ancient Roman equivalent to threatening a filibuster was the warning, "I'm watching the skies." So Romulus and Remus are amateur augurs, each stand on their chosen hill and watch for birds. Remus sees a sign first, 6 vultures. Vultures might seem like a bad omen to you, but they were the sacred bird of Mars. War creates dead bodies, so Mars is heavily associated with scavengers like vultures and wild dogs. And Mars is, of course, Romulus and Remus's father. So vultures are good, a sign from Biodad. Remus, standing on the Aventine, sees 6 vultures first, but then Romulus on the Palatine sees 12 vultures. Now it's another argument. Remus says he won because his sign came first. Romulus says he won because his sign had more birds in it. So they say, fine, it's fine. We'll just start 2 cities, one on the Palatine and one on the Aventine. We're off to a great start on this whole civilization founding thing. Their followers divide themselves up, and both brothers set to work on laying out their new cities. One of the first things Romulus does is to lay out stones for his defensive wall. Most ancient cities were walled, and the defensive wall was important enough to come first, though in this case it's only symbolic, just a ring of rocks or a trench establishing where the walls are to be built. Remus walks over from his hill and can't resist poking a little fun at his brother. He says, "What? These are your walls? These can't keep anyone out. Watch, look at this. I'm invading you!" And he hops over the wall. Like I said, brothers. It's just like when you're in the back seat going, "I'm not touching you," except it's, I'm invading you. But Romulus is having none of it. He kills Remus as Rome's first enemy invader. Oh look, it's another primary source quote. This one comes from Livy. "Sic diende, quicumque alias transiliat moenia mea." This is what Romulus was supposed to have shouted out after killing Remus. "Then thus to anyone else who jumps over my walls." Here we have Romulus throwing down the gauntlet with an unforgiving precedent. I don't care if you are my brother, no one gets a free pass when it comes to my city's safety. A lot of parts of this story have a multitude of versions, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but this is probably the part with the most variation. The version I just told you with Romulus killing Remus for jumping over the walls is the most common, but Livy starts with another. That Romulus and Remus's factions just couldn't agree, so they came to blows, and Remus was killed in the fight. Another version, memorably told in Ovid's Fausti, says that Romulus had entrusted his second-in-command, Keller, with guarding the walls, and it was Keller who killed Remus for jumping over them. In that version, Romulus is sad that Remus is dead, and he says a variation on the whole "thus to anyone else who jumps over my walls" thing to try to cover it up. But then he breaks down and cries at the funeral. But whatever the variation, Remus dies, and all plans for building on the Aventine are scrapped. Everyone reunites on the Palatine Hill to build Romulus's city, which he names Roma after himself. The traditional date for the founding of Rome is April 21st, 753 BCE. April 21st becomes a Roman holiday called Perilia, which is heavily focused on sheep and shepherds, appropriate for Romulus's pastoral origins. Actually, Perilia was most likely a festival before Rome existed that later got repurposed into Rome's birthday, but that doesn't stop Latinists from celebrating April 21st. Sidebar on historicity. Yeah, there isn't much. Romulus and Remus were definitely legendary. You can see it in Romulus's name. He was clearly named after Rome, not the other way around. His name is a diminutive. The UL infix means little. Romulus just means Little Rome. Most probably, Rome developed as a village of shepherds sometime in the 8th century BCE. What we have here is a story, a myth, and it tells us more about who later Romans thought they were than about who early Romans actually were. I brought up in the last video that the foundation myth of Rome is based around a fratricide, the killing of Remus by his brother Romulus. To me, the most convincing explanation of this curious fact is that later Romans believed that civil war was in their DNA. Certainly the Roman Republic was a uniquely contentious form of government for its time. Where the civilizations around Rome were all monarchies, which enjoyed an illusion of harmony because everyone organized themselves under a single ruler, the Romans were ruling themselves through constant debate. We take it for granted that's how governments are supposed to work, but Rome was an anomaly. A monarchist would have looked at the Roman Senate in horror, civil unrest as a daily occurrence, drawn-out fights to get even the simplest tasks done. The Romans had their myths to tell them what it meant to be Roman. In the Roman imagination, Rome was founded on blood and discord, and that's how it must continue. Okay, so we rejoin Romulus, king of the new city of Rome. Rome becomes a haven for lots of people who are living on the margins of society. Lawful folk like shepherds, as well as criminals who have been thrown out of other places. Problem is, they're pretty much all men. Romulus starts thinking of how he can get some women. He tries to establish treaties with nearby cities to create intermarriage, but they all want nothing to do with these upstarts and criminals. So Romulus decides he's going to steal women from a nearby people called the Sabines. Actually, the Romans steal from a bunch of different people, but the Sabines are the biggest, so we usually reduce the story to the Sabines. Romulus holds a festival with feasting and plays just outside his city walls, which are real city walls now, not just a symbolic boundary that you can get murdered for hopping over. The Romans get the Sabines and the others nice and drunk, and while the plays are going on and everyone is sleepy and sluggish, Romulus gives the signal for the Romans to take the Sabine women and bring them into the city walls. This is referred to as the rape of the Sabine women. The original connotation in this case was the old definition of the word rape, which really just meant kidnapping or abduction. But of course the story necessarily involves the modern definition of rape as well, because we're dealing with men kidnapping women in order to make them wives against their will. Livy has very ancient attitudes toward this. In his account, the Romans woo the Sabine women with kind words, and many of the women are all too happy to just become Romans. If all this were real, and it isn't, I can't imagine it actually playing out that way. But that's how the story goes. When the Sabines make war on Rome to get their women back, some women remain loyal to their Sabine fathers, while others switch their allegiance to new Roman husbands. In an early battle, Romulus kills Akron, who is the king of one of the smaller cities that the Romans stole women from. It strikes Romulus as such a big deal that the king of the city killed another king in single combat that he invents a whole new honor for it, the spolia opima. Spolia means spoils. In ancient warfare, when you killed somebody, you took their weapons, armor, and whatever else they had on them as part of your stash of personal glory. In the present day, stealing from an enemy is a war crime, but in the Greek and Roman eras, it was an important facet of warfare. Opima means rich, not to be confused with optima, which is best. The spolia opima becomes an honor for when a Roman general kills an enemy general in battle, and it's a very rare thing to happen, since the generals aren't usually doing the fighting. Romulus wins this first spolia opima, and it only happens 2 more times in all of Roman history. Only the last of those 3 times is verifiably historical. The general who wins the spolia opima takes the spoils and nails them to an oak tree, sacred to Jupiter, then later carries them in a triumph and dedicates them to Jupiter Feretrius, in a temple that Romulus is said to have founded on the occasion of his victory over Akron, the first temple in Rome. During the war with the Sabines is a famous incident of treachery. Tarpeia is the daughter of a Roman commander and a Vestal Virgin, thus one of the rare pre-Sabine Roman women. She is out getting water one night during the war, and sees a horde of Sabine soldiers gathered at one of the gates. They ask her to let them in, and she says she will, in exchange for what they are wearing on their left arms. Apparently the Sabine men wore jewelry, and had gold bracelets on their left arms. So she lets them in, motivated by greed, and on their way in, each soldier throws his shield on top of her. They also carried their shields on their left arms, so they were giving her what she had asked for in a twisted sort of way. And just when you thought this myth couldn't get any more misogynist, we finally get one woman with actual agency, and she uses it to betray her country out of greed for pretty jewelry. Ugh. The Romans fight the Sabines back off, so the treachery comes to nothing, and Tarpeia's body is thrown from the rocky side of the Capitoline onto sharp rocks underneath. These rocks are then called the Tarpeian rocks, and for the rest of Roman history, the punishment for treason is to be thrown to your death on these rocks. It's worse than just death, it's death with extreme dishonor. The war drags on for a while, and eventually Hersilia, the Sabine wife of Romulus, runs out on the battlefield and begs them to just make peace. Other women run out with her and hold up their babies, the children of the Romans and the grandchildren of the Sabines, to show them what's at stake and to drive home that their people are already intermingled. The Romans and the Sabines agree to join up and become one people. The Sabines become Romans on equal footing with the original Romans. The Sabines come to be known as the first conquest in Rome's long history of expansion, and for all we know, that might be historically accurate. The Sabines really might have been the first major people assimilated by the Romans. They weren't the last. As part of the peace, Romulus takes on the Sabine king Titus Tatius as his co-king. Apparently the 2 kings rule in harmony. Then there's a whole snafu between some of Tatius's friends and some people from Lavinium. Ambassadors come from Lavinium to smooth it over, and Tatius rudely rejects them. So when Tatius goes to Lavinium to attend a religious ceremony, the Laurentine people kill him for his impertinence. So Romulus is the sole king of Rome again. Romulus has a long reign. All the legendary kings of Rome rule for 30 years or so. It's one of the reasons you know they're all fictional, because no monarchy has 7 long-lasting rulers all in a row. Other accomplishments in his reign include creating the 30 Roman tribes, each named after one of the 30 Sabine women he kidnapped, and creating the Roman Senate. The Latin word for Senate, senatus, is derived from senax, old man, because the Senate was supposed to be the 100 wisest men in Rome, and age is ostensibly tied to wisdom. Romulus gathers up the 100 wisest men to act as an advisory council. He brings problems to the senators, also called the patres. They argue about the best course of action, and Romulus makes his decision based on what he heard in the arguments. The Senate doesn't necessarily vote or anything, because all the power is vested in the king. The function of the Senate is only to advise the king. Eventually, Romulus starts to get a little overbearing and tyrannical, and the Senate decides it would be best to just get rid of him. Opportunity strikes when Romulus is leading the Roman army on a parade on the Campus Martius, the field of Mars just outside the city walls. All the people are there to watch the parade, including the Senate. A storm pops up, and the army and the people run for cover. The senators corner Romulus when everyone is out of sight. They kill him, chop him up, and hide pieces of him under their togas. When the people in the army come back, one of the senators, Proculus Iulius, reports that a cloud descended from the sky and took Romulus up to the heavens to become a god. Romulus's new god name is Quirinus, and he is worshipped as a protecting deity of Rome for the rest of Roman history. So Romulus begins by founding Rome with the murder of his brother, expands his city through kidnapping, and ends up murdered by a conspiracy of the noblemen he employed to advise him. It's not the cheeriest beginning for a city, but it establishes the theme of civil violence, which will continue for the rest of Rome's history. Here's our more immediate concern. Romulus had no sons, and left no choice for an heir, nor a process by which one should be chosen. How does a city that has only ever had one king choose their next one? Find out in the next video.